Welcome to the presentation on the U.S. opportunity and strategy to exit from the Iran war with minimal losses via Pakistan mediation. In this presentation, we present a comprehensive strategic analysis of how the United States can leverage Pakistan's unique diplomatic position to achieve a face-saving victory and exit from the ongoing conflict with Iran. This presentation examines the multi-phase pathway, the various dimensions of rationale including economic, strategic, global and political factors, and the specific advantages that Pakistan brings to the delicate diplomatic equation. We also address potential risks and mitigation strategies. This framework is particularly timely given the recent developments showing Pakistan's active mediation efforts, including direct communication between the army chief and President Trump, as well as the Prime Minister and the Iranian President. Let's establish the current context. Pakistan has emerged as a critical mediator in the US-Iran conflict. According to multiple officials familiar with the discussions, Pakistan has actively pitched Islamabad as a venue for talks involving senior figures from both the Trump administration and the Iran side. What makes Pakistan uniquely positioned is the army chief's dual axis. He maintains strong military-to-military relationships with Tehran while also having direct communication channels with President Trump, as evidenced by their recent phone call. The Pakistani Prime Minister has also been engaged holding telephone conversations with the Iranian President to discuss regional peace and diplomatic dialogue. Interestingly, while Iran's foreign ministry has publicly denied holding direct negotiations with the US since the conflict began, their spokesperson acknowledged that messages were received via certain friendly states conveying US requests for negotiations. This public denial, paired with the private acceptance of intermediated messages, creates the exact diplomatic space that Pakistan can exploit, allowing Iran to save face domestically while still engaging in substantive negotiations. Phase 1 of this strategy involves establishing robust back-channel diplomacy through Islamabad. The beauty of using Pakistan as an intermediary is that it requires no public acknowledgement of either the US or Iran. The army chief can shuttle between the Washington and Tehran, carrying messages, testing proposals, and identifying where genuine flexibility exists on both sides. This phase is about intelligence gathering and trust building. What are Iran's actual red line versus their public rhetoric? What minimum concessions would allow the US to declare victory? Pakistan's military leadership, particularly the general, has credibility and discretion to conduct these sensitive exchanges. Unlike the European mediators, who might be perceived as aligned with the US interests, or Gulf states that Iran views with suspicion, Pakistan occupies a unique middle ground. They are a Muslim-majority nuclear power with historical non-alignment credentials, yet they maintain substantial defense cooperation with the United States. During this phase, the focus would be on identifying specific, verifiable concessions that Iran might offer, perhaps limitations on uranium enrichment levels, enhanced IAEA monitoring protocols, or commitments to restrain proxy forces in the region. Simultaneously, Pakistan would communicate what the US needs to credibly claim victory and justify de-escalation to the domestic audiences. Phase 2 is perhaps the most delicate, crafting a victory narrative that satisfies the American domestic political requirements while allowing Iran to save face. Through Pakistan mediation, the US would seek to secure specific Iranian concessions that can be packaged as decisive American achievements. These might include Iranian agreement to enhance IAEA monitoring with shorter inspection timelines, temporary limits on uranium enrichment levels, commitments to reduce the support for proxy forces attacking US interests or allies, guarantees to keep the Strait of Hormuz open for commercial shipping, or even humanitarian gestures like release of detained personnel. The critical element here is that Pakistan's involvement allows Iran to make these concessions without publicly admitting that they are negotiations with the Great Satan. Iran can claim they are acting in their own national interest or responding to broader regional diplomacy or making tactical adjustments, anything but acknowledging direct US-Iran negotiations. Meanwhile, the United States can pinpoint to concrete outcomes and declare victory. President Trump could announce that the American pressure and military strength forced Iran to back down, that the nuclear threats have been reduced, and that the regional stability is improving, and that the American forces can now return home having accomplished their mission. This is not about deception, it is about creating a diplomatic space for both sides to achieve their core objectives while managing the domestic political constraints. Phase 3 brings the strategy to its public culmination, the Islamabad exit ceremony. Pakistan would host a formal event, potentially at the Prime Minister's residence or a military headquarters, where the outcomes of the back-channel negotiations are formalized. This would not necessarily be a US-Iran bilateral signing, as that would violate Iran's need for plausible deniability. Instead, it might be a multilateral statement on regional stability or separate but coordinated announcements, with the Pakistani leadership serving as the witness and guarantor of the agreements. President Trump, potentially via video link or through a special envoy, would announce, "Through strong diplomacy and the help of our partner Pakistan, we have achieved our objectives without prolonged occupation. Iran has backed down, our military strength and negotiation prowess has secured American interests. Our brave service members can now return home." The key is timing the announcement to maximize political benefit while allowing sufficient time for verification mechanisms to be established. US forces would begin a phased drawdown, framed not as a retreat but as a strategic repositioning following mission accomplishment. Pakistan's role as host and guarantor provides additional credibility. If Iran violates the terms, they are not just betraying the US, they are betraying Pakistan, which carries weight in Islamic world diplomacy. This ceremony transforms what could be portrayed as a messy withdrawal into a statesman-like conclusion to a successful campaign. Now let's examine the economic rationale for pursuing this Pakistan-mediated exit strategy. The economic stakes of a prolonged conflict with Iran are staggering. Energy markets are already nervous, and any significant disruption to Iranian oil exports, or worse, a closure of the Strait of Hormuz, could send crude oil prices to $120 to $150 per barrel or even higher. For context, every $10 increase in oil prices typically reduces US GDP growth by about 0.2 to 0.3 percentage points and acts as a tax on the consumers. At $150 per barrel, we are talking about a potential recession level type impacts. The Strait of Hormuz is not just important, it is irreplaceable in the short term. Roughly 20% of the global oil supply and even higher percentage of liquefied natural gas passes through this narrow choke point. A prolonged conflict that disrupts this flow would trigger a global economic crisis with particularly severe impacts on the US allies in Europe and Asia. Beyond oil prices, the direct costs of military operations are enormous. Maintaining carrier strike groups, air wings, missile defense systems, and ground forces in the region costs billions of dollars monthly, resources that could be deployed to domestic infrastructure, education, healthcare, or deficit reduction. A Pakistan brokered diplomatic exit stabilizes energy markets almost immediately upon announcement, as traders price and reduce risk. Military victory, even if achievable, would take far longer and cost far more. The economic case for diplomatic exit via Pakistan is overwhelming. The strategic logic for this approach is equally compelling. As noted in the recent analysis, once a war begins without coherent justification, clearly defined goals, or a credible exit strategy, the optimal outcome becomes simply getting out with minimal damage. The US-Iran conflict suffers from exactly these problems. What is the end state? Regime change? That is not feasible. Destroying Iran's nuclear infrastructure? They can rebuild. Eliminating all Iranian regional influence? That would require decades of occupation. Pakistan offers something no other country can: genuine military-to-military access to Iranian leadership combined with credible relationships in Washington. The general can speak frankly to both sides in ways that diplomats cannot. He understands the military red lines, operational realities, and face-saving measures that the armed forces needs. Moreover, Pakistan's position is strengthened by its ongoing military cooperation with the United States. They are hosting joint exercises like Inspired Gambit 2026, even while maintaining channels to Tehran. This dual engagement gives Pakistan leverage and credibility. Perhaps most importantly, Pakistan provides a classic diplomatic off-ramp that allows Iran to make concessions privately while maintaining defined rhetoric publicly. In Iranian domestic politics, leaders cannot be seen negotiating with America, but they can be seen making independent decisions that happen to align with what Pakistan suggests. This is not a weakness, it is sophisticated statecraft that recognizes the difference between substance and symbolism. The global and international dimensions of this strategy are critical to America's border strategic position. The United States has identified competition with China as its top strategic priority for the coming decades, the so-called Indo-Pacific pivot. Every dollar, every warship, every diplomat tied up in the Middle East conflict with Iran is a resource not available for this primary mission. A Pakistan facilitated exit from Iran allows the US to refocus on China with undivided attention and maximum resources. Additionally, European allies have been increasingly wary of the Middle East escalation that could trigger refugee flows, energy price spikes, and terrorist backlash. A diplomatic exit demonstrates that the US can be a responsible global leader, not just a military hegemon. It preserves alliance cohesion at a time when unity is essential for addressing challenges from Russia to climate change. Critically, a swift resolution prevents Russia and China from positioning themselves as alternative peace brokers in the region. Both Moscow and Beijing would love to portray the US as a reckless warmonger that Pakistan had to rescue from its own aggression. By working with Pakistan to achieve a diplomatic solution, the US co-opts this narrative and keeps Pakistan in the Western orbit rather than pushing them towards closer ties with China or Russia. Finally, demonstrating diplomatic flexibility is not a weakness, it is a strength. It shows that the US can win without endless war, that American power includes the ability to shape outcomes through intermediaries, and that US leadership is sophisticated enough to use all instruments of national power, not just military force. The domestic political rationale in the United States is perhaps the most immediate driver for this strategy. President Trump's political base prioritizes winning over prolonged engagement. They want to see the American strength affirmed, adversaries backing down, and the US troops coming home, not endless nation building or open ended conflicts. A Pakistan mediated victory delivers exactly this political commodity. Trump can stand before supporters and declare that the American pressure forced Iran to capitulate, that his tough negotiating style achieved what weak predecessors could not, and that American lives and treasure are no longer being wasted. This narrative satisfies the base without requiring actual regime change or permanent occupation. Timing is also crucial. With domestic priorities mounting and escalation cycles approaching, a clean exit before further escalation avoids the political liability of a protracted conflict that could drag on for months or years with uncertain outcomes. Congressional pressure is already building, with lawmakers from both parties seeking clarity on exit plans and expressing concern about mission creep. A Pakistan facilitated solution gives the administration a concrete answer to these concerns. Additionally, successfully leveraging Pakistan's strength, the US Pakistan bilateral ties, which have been strained in recent years, a mediation success story gives both governments a positive narrative, potentially unlocking deeper defense cooperation, counterterrorism collaboration, and even economic partnerships. For a president who values deal making and personal relationships, bringing Pakistan back into the American orbit while simultaneously resolving the Iran crisis represents a significant political achievement. Let's examine specifically why Pakistan is uniquely qualified to play this mediation role. First, military credibility. The general commands genuine respect in both Tehran and Washington. In Tehran, he is seen as a professional military leader who understands security concerns and will not lecture Iran about democracy or human rights. In Washington, he is viewed as a reliable partner on counterterrorism and regional stability. This dual credibility is exceptionally rare. Second, regional legitimacy. As a Muslim majority nuclear armed state with a history of non-alignment, Pakistan carries weight in the Islamic world that Western powers simply cannot replicate. When Pakistan speaks, Iran listens in ways it would not for European mediators. Third, dual access. Pakistan is currently hosting joint military exercises with the United States, like Inspired Gambit 2026, demonstrating ongoing defense cooperation. Simultaneously, they maintain robust military-to-military and diplomatic channels with Iran. This ability to engage both sides substantially without either side questioning Pakistan's bona fides is Pakistan's superpower in this scenario. Fourth, trusted messenger status. In today's fractured geopolitical landscape, finding a country that both the US and Iran can trust enough to carry sensitive messages is extraordinarily difficult. European powers are seen as American proxies, Gulf states are viewed with suspicion by Tehran, Russia and China are adversarial to Washington. Pakistan occupies this narrow but crucial middle ground. They are not perfect, they have their own interests, but they are acceptable to both sides, and this is what makes them indispensable. Now let's address the risks and how to mitigate them. The first major risk is that Iran will publicly deny that any negotiations occurred, potentially even making concessions. This is actually built into the strategy, but it creates challenges for the US victory narrative. If Iran says we are not negotiating with America and we are not backing down, how does the US claim victory? The mitigation is to focus on outcomes rather than the process. Through Pakistani mediation, secure concessions that are independently verifiable. IAEA inspectors can confirm enhanced monitoring without Iran having to admit they agreed to it for the US. Oil markets will respond to reduced tensions regardless of Iranian rhetoric. Proxy attacks can decrease without Iran publicly ordering the change. The US can point to these observable outcomes and say our pressure worked, while Iran tells its domestic audience we made tactical adjustments based on our own strategic calculus, not American demands. Both sides get their narrative. Pakistan's role is critical here. They can help craft language and mechanisms that allow this dual narrative to coexist. For example, Iran might announce enhanced IAEA cooperation as part of a broader regional confidence-building initiative that Pakistan proposed, without mentioning US involvement. The US can simultaneously claim that this is a victory for maximum pressure. It is not dishonest. It is diplomatic sophistication that recognizes both sides have domestic political constraints that must be managed. The second major risk is Israeli opposition. Israel has consistently stated that it will not accept an Iran deal that leaves the Islamic Republic with any nuclear capability or regional influence. Prime Minister Netanyahu or his successors may view a Pakistan-mediated exit as American weakness or appeasement, potentially leading Israel to take unilateral military action that derails the entire process. The mitigation strategy requires deep, continuous coordination with Jerusalem throughout the Pakistani mediation process. Israel should be brought into the loop, not necessarily on every detail, but on the broad parameters and the objectives. The US must make clear that this is not about accommodating Iran, but about achieving US objectives in a substantial way. The framing is essential. This deal does not weaken Israeli security, it strengthens it by reducing the immediate threat of regional war. While a Muslim majority country engaging Iran, Pakistan can potentially influence Iranian behavior regarding Israel in ways the US cannot directly negotiate. The key is ensuring Israel feels consulted, compensated, and ultimately more secure with the deal than without it. The third risk is domestic American political criticism. Despite the victory narrative, political opponents, whether Democratic critics or Republican hawks, may frame the Pakistani mediated exit as a weakness, retreat, or appeasement. They might argue that the US is leaving the job unfinished, that Iran will cheat, that American credibility is damaged, or that Pakistan cannot be trusted. The mitigation requires careful messaging and framing from day one. First, never call it a withdrawal or exit. Call it a strategic repositioning following mission accomplishment. Second, emphasize tangible, verifiable gains. Iran has agreed to X, Y, and Z concrete measures that enhance American security. Third, highlight that Pakistan is not some neutral arbiter, but a US partner that America successfully leveraged to achieve our objectives. This is American diplomacy at work, not American weakness. Fourth, bring in credible validators, retired military leaders, intelligence officials, regional experts who can testify that this outcome serves American interests. Fifth, contrast this with the alternative. Should we stay in Iran for another decade? Should we spend another $1 trillion? Should we risk another Nam or Afghanistan? The Pakistan angle is actually a strength here. It demonstrates creative diplomacy, smart use of partners, and achieving objectives without endless American blood and treasure. Frame Pakistan not as the savior, but as the instrument of American statecraft. This is the US playing chess while adversaries play checkers. The mitigation requires managing expectations and roles carefully from the outset. Publicly, the US must remain the primary negotiation. Pakistan facilitates, but America dictates terms. In press conferences and statements, emphasize that Pakistan is helping the US achieve American objectives, not pursuing an independent agenda. Privately, through diplomatic channels, the US should be clear about what it can and cannot offer Pakistan in return for successful mediation. Perhaps there is room for enhanced military cooperation, counterterrorism collaboration, or economic partnership, but any agreement mediated through Pakistan requires robust verification and implementation mechanisms to ensure both sides uphold their commitments. For nuclear-related concessions, the International Atomic Energy provides the ideal verification framework. Enhanced IAEA monitoring, whether through more frequent inspections, access to additional sites, or installation of more surveillance equipment, can be implemented without Iran having to publicly acknowledge it is doing so at American behest. The IAEA reports to its board, the US reviews these reports, and compliance can be assessed objectively. For maritime security and Strait of Hormuz access, the verification is more straightforward. Oil flows, insurance rates, and shipping patterns are all publicly observable. Pakistan can help establish regional monitoring mechanisms, perhaps involving Gulf states, to report on Iranian naval activities and ensure freedom of navigation. For regional de-escalation, reduce proxy attacks, less support for militant groups, verification is harder but not impossible. Intelligence sharing between the US and Pakistan combined with Pakistani channels to Iran can create a feedback loop where violations are quickly identified and addressed. Critically, the US force drawdown should be phased and explicitly tied to Iranian compliance. This is not a one-time withdrawal but a reciprocal process. Iran takes verifiable steps, US reduces forces proportionally, Iran takes more steps, US reduces further. Pakistan can serve as the honest broker in this process, confirming compliance on both sides and helping resolve disputes before they derail the entire arrangement. This verification framework transforms promises into accountable commitments. In modern statecraft, victory is increasingly defined not by battlefield conquest but by the ability to exit conflicts on favorable terms while achieving core strategic objectives. Pakistan offers the United States a rare and valuable diplomatic asset, a credible neutral channel to Tehran that simultaneously maintains strong ties to Washington. This is not common in today's polarized world. By leveraging this relationship through the three-phase pathway, which has been outlined, back channel diplomacy, victory narrative crafting, and the Islamabad exit ceremony, the United States can achieve what military force alone cannot. A sustainable resolution that protects American interests, satisfies domestic political requirements, preserves alliance cohesion, and frees resources for the primary challenge of competing with China. The economic rationale is overwhelming, avoiding oil price shocks and endless war costs. The strategic logic is sound, recognizing the limits of military power and the value of diplomatic off-ramps. The global benefits are clear, strengthening the Indo-Pacific pivot and preventing adversaries from filling vacuums. The political advantages are immediate, delivering victory to the American people without endless occupation. And Pakistan emerges stronger too, deepening its partnership with the United States while enhancing its regional standing. This is not a perfect solution. No diplomatic solution ever is perfect. But it is an elegant solution that recognizes the complexity of modern conflict and the enduring value of smart, creative diplomacy. Pakistan provides a runway for the American exit. The question is whether the Americans actually use this runway. Based on this analysis, I offer 6 key recommendations for US policymakers considering this Pakistan-mediated exit strategy. First, empower the general as the primary Pakistani channel. His unique access and credibility are irreplaceable. Give him the authority and resources to shuttle effectively between Washington and Tehran. Second, define with precision what specific verifiable Iranian concessions are required for the US to declare victory and begin the withdrawal. Do not leave this ambiguous. Know exactly what you need and communicate it clearly through Pakistani channels. Third, coordinate closely with Israel throughout the process. Bring them in early, address their concerns, offer compensatory security measures, and ensure they feel the deal strengthens rather than weakens their position. Fourth, prepare domestic messaging well in advance that emphasizes American victory, strength, and smart diplomacy. Control the narrative from the outset. Do not let opponents define this as retreat or weakness. Fifth, develop a detailed phased conditions-based timeline for forced drawdown. Sixth, determine in advance what appropriate incentives to offer to Pakistan for successful mediation, whether they're enhanced military cooperation, economic partnership, or diplomatic support, and communicate these clearly. These recommendations provide a roadmap for turning the strategic framework into operational reality. This is perhaps the most important point. When the United States enters a conflict against an adversary that operates according to Sun Tzu's principles, patience, strategic deception, indirect approach, winning without fighting, the American ego becomes not just a liability but a fatal vulnerability. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Iran has spent decades mastering exactly this approach. If the American leaders arrive in Islamabad for mediation carrying the weight of exceptionalism, demanding public surrender, or insisting on humiliating terms, they will not just fail, they will catastrophically miss the last opportunity for a graceful exit. Pakistan is offering a rare diplomatic gift, a face-saving pathway out for both sides, but this gift has an expiration date. The message must be clear. Accept that the situation is messy, accept that perfect victory is not achievable, accept that priority now is preserving American lives and the lives of all other people. France, for example, has a complex web of defense agreements across the Middle East and North Africa. Countries now caught in this quagmire. Every day of escalations puts French, British, Italian, and other allied personnel at risk, and also everyone in the Middle East and everybody else associated with it, and all the economies that are being affected by this. The United States started this confrontation and quagmire. That creates a responsibility not just to win, but to end it responsibly. This is not about weakness, it is about wisdom. As Sun Tzu also said, he who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. Knowing when to exit is the highest form of strategic competence. Let's speak directly to the MAGA principle that animates much of the American political discourse today. Make America Great Again at its core means prioritizing American workers, American families, and American lives. It means rejecting the neoconservative playbook of endless regime change wars that drain treasure and sacrifice sons and daughters for ambiguous outcomes. If MAGA means anything, it means bringing the Americans home. However, there are powerful special interests, lobbyists, defense contractors, ideological hardliners, certain pro-Israel advocacy groups who may exert pressure to continue escalation, to strike harder, to demand total surrender from Iran. These voices may frame any diplomatic exit as betrayal. Ask the fundamental question: whose interests are truly being served? The US soldiers deployed in the Gulf, the American family paying $5 per gallon, or maybe up to $8 per gallon soon, the American voter who wanted an end to forever wars, or distant interests that benefit from perpetual conflict. A Pakistan-mediated exit that brings American forces home, stabilizes energy prices, and reduces the risk of a wider war is not a betrayal of MAGA, it is a fulfillment of it. Peace with honor achieved through smart diplomacy serves the American people far better than a prolonged conflict that achieves no clear victory while costing lives and treasure. The politicians who listen to the loudest lobbies rather than the wisest strategists may do the opposite of what MAGA demands. Do not let that happen. Leave while you can with dignity, with minimal losses, with a narrative of strength. That is the truly patriotic choice. Let me close with a final reality check. Time is not neutral in this conflict. Every day that passes without a diplomatic off-ramp increases the probability of a catastrophic miscalculation, a missile hits the wrong target, a naval encounter that escalates, a proxy attack that triggers disproportionate retaliation. These are not hypotheticals. They are all historical patterns in every Middle East conflict or other conflicts. Economically, the costs compound daily. Higher oil prices feed inflation, which pressures households, which constrains fiscal policy, which weakens the US competitive position globally. Militarily, every additional US asset deployed to the region becomes a potential target. Every patrol increases the chance of an incident. Every week of heightened alert exhausts personnel and equipment. Diplomatically, the allies are watching. France with its defense commitments across the Sahel and the Levant, the UK with its Gulf partnerships, the NATO partners who rely on US strategic focus, all are questioning whether American judgment can be trusted if this escalates further. And critically, Pakistan's willingness to mediate is not infinite. If Washington appears to be using Islamabad merely as a propaganda tool rather than engaging in good faith, that channel might close. Other mediators might step in. Russia, China, Turkey, and the US will lose control of the narrative and the outcome. The door to a graceful Pakistan-facilitated exit is open right now. It will not stay open forever. Walk through it while you can, declare victory, bring your people home, preserve the American strength for the challenges that truly matter. That is not a retreat, that is strategy, that is leadership. This slide addresses a critical perception issue that directly impacts the success of any US diplomatic initiative in the region, including the Pakistani-mediated exit strategy that we have been discussing. The metaphor of shaking the ant jar with many colored ants is one I have heard repeatedly from the Pakistani officials, business leaders, and international executives who operate across South Asia and the Middle East. Let me explain it. The ant jar represents the incredibly complex, delicate, and historically layered ecosystem of the region. Shia and Sunni communities, Persian and Arab and Turk and South Asian identities, tribal structures and modern states, monarchies and republics, nuclear powers and developing economies, energy producers, and transit corridors. Each colored ant has its own interests, grievances, alliances, and red lines. For generations, these actors have developed informal rules of coexistence, conflict management, and compromise. Now enters the US, militarily dominant, politically impatient, and often operating with limited granular understanding of these local dynamics. When the US shakes the jar through sudden sanctions, regime change rhetoric, drone strikes, or public ultimatums, it does not just target one ant, it destabilizes the entire ecosystem. And scatter, collide, form new defensive alliances, or lash out unpredictably. From the perspective of Pakistani business communities and global investors, this is not a strategy, it is recklessness. They do not see strength, they see a superpower acting because it has the capability, not because it has a coherent plan for the day after. And the consequences are tangible. Investment freezes, supply chain disruptions happen, insurance premiums spike, talent flight happens. The long-term reputational damage to American partnerships are quite evident. When Pakistan offers to mediate, it is not just about resolving the immediate Iran crisis. It is about signaling to the global business community that the US can listen, can respect complexity, and can choose stability over disruption. If Washington arrives in Islamabad still shaking the jar, that signal is lost. Pakistanis will cooperate tactically but withdraw trust strategically. Global businesses will hedge their bets, diversify away from US-aligned partners, and accelerate the search for alternative financial, technological, and diplomatic ecosystems. This perception issue is not secondary. It is central to whether any diplomatic exit can hold. Rebuilding trust requires more than words. It requires demonstrating that the US understands that in a jar of many colored ants, the goal is not to dominate the chaos, but to help restore conditions where each ant can pursue its interests without triggering systematic collapse. This is the mindset Pakistan is asking Washington to bring to the table. If the US can do that, the mediation can succeed. If not, even Pakistan's unique access may not be enough to prevent further escalation and further damage to the American credibility in the eyes of the very partners whose cooperation they need the most. If the United States wants the Pakistani mediated exit strategy to succeed and wants to rebuild the trust that has been eroded by perceptions of jar-shaking behavior, there are 4 concrete shifts in approach that the Pakistani stakeholders and global business communities need to see. First, consistency over impulsivity. Markets and diplomatic partners crave predictability. When US policy shifts dramatically with tweets, press briefings, or electoral cycles, it creates uncertainty that discourages long-term investments and cooperation. A commitment to steady communicated strategy, even if that strategy evolves, builds confidence. Second, consultation before action, not justification after. Too often, the US informs allies and partners of decisions already made, then asks for their support. In complex regions like South Asia and the Gulf, this approach backfires. Pakistan in particularly values being treated as a strategic partner whose insights on Iran, Afghanistan, and regional dynamics are sought early and genuinely. Third, respect for regional knowledge and local agency. Pakistani officials and business leaders are not looking for the US to adopt their views wholesale, but they do expect acknowledgement that they understand their neighborhoods better than any external power can. Dismissing local expertise as accommodation or weakness is a profound strategic error. Fourth, prioritize economic stability as a strategic objective, not as an afterthought. For Pakistan with its fragile economy and debt challenges, and for global businesses operating across emerging markets, stability is not just preferable, it's existential. When US actions trigger capital flight, currency volatility, or trade disruption, the message received is that American strategic priorities override partner survival. That breeds resentment, not alignment. If the US can demonstrate these 4 shifts through actions, not just words, during the Pakistan-mediated Iran negotiations, it will do more than secure an exit from one conflict. It will begin repairing the broader perception that America is a disruptive force rather than a stabilizing partner. That repair is essential not just for this crisis, but for every future challenge where the US leadership depends on voluntary cooperation, not coercion. Pakistan is watching. Global businesses are watching. The question is whether Washington is ready to show them a different approach. Thank you for taking the time to see this presentation. If you have a better idea, please share it to the world. So hopefully somebody will listen and understand it and get some stability in this region.